Hi, everybody. Oops, I was already too quick here. There we are. I won't bother you with any law stuff. I don't know where you got that from, but I'm here with policy in think tank, and being asked to zoom out and kind of give a broader view, but still keeping the lens on the budget. Budget is the metaphor for politics, and politics is a metaphor for geopolitics these days. So I kindly asked ChatGPT to give me an artistic rendition of the geopolitical situation of Europe. And this is what I got. We can kind of debate the ins and outs of the beleaguerment and the abandonment that we see here, and what that fist is and who is in that fist, and whether it's the right color, whether we should have maps of different countries, whether they should be EU countries or other countries, and so on. But let's keep that perspective. There isn't any single person that I know in Europe who thinks you can do it without the EU. We've been asking my member states and so on. Nobody thinks that if you take away the EU, we can actually do it on our own. Nobody thinks that. Everybody thinks, and that's been the trajectory of the EU, certainly since Trump and the war in Ukraine, that we have to ask more and more to go through Brussels somehow. Somehow. Even though it's improvisation and reaction most of the time. What does that mean? Well, going to kick in some open doors. Let's do some benchmarking. If we are collectively and partially through the EU have to be competitive with these other forces that are not very sympathetic towards us, that's the open door. You mentioned we are an economic giant, yes, and the economic part is now geo-economic. Therefore, it serves all the rest. We've been talking about defense, but defense is a technology issue, it's an industry issue. You can't separate it from the economics, and therefore that's EU. So are we a giant economically? Yeah, sure, why not? We still are a giant. Are we a dwarf? Well, I would call it a worm in budget terms, rather than a dwarf. So that is, in terms of figures and size of total GDP, where we stand compared to the others at EU level. Yeah. Now, for me, that is simply a no-brainer. I can't for the life of me, I understand the politics behind it, but I can't for the life of me, in terms of our collective mission that we have, to make sure that Europe gets out of this situation that it's in, and we deliver something for the next generation where we say we have taken back control of our destiny, and this is a territory where we still can decide our own future, and we are still proud of who we are and what we stand for. Then I can't understand the percentage point fetishism. I really can't. If you're a fetishist about percentage points, I ask you to take a look in the mirror of history. We also have to take a look in the mirror ourselves, and this has been mentioned here. This is and all these figures are approximations, apples and oranges, and budget lines and so on. But this is a representation of how much of that budget, which sits at the quote-unquote federal EU level, is actually used for what we now see the new priorities: security, defense, resilience, innovation, competitiveness, those 5. And you see that there is room for growth. Yeah? I would even call it room for a quantum leap, yeah? In terms of prioritization at EU level. This is the snapshot. All these figures are snapshots of 26. For the US, we know that Mr. Trump wants to increase the Pentagon budget with 40% next year. That's a $750 billion increase in 1 year. So add that to what is already there. Are we going to be competitive? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. That's the new word that's in the air. Let's call the budget a competitiveness tool. So is that a competitive position we're in? Obviously it's not. So we have to do something about it. And the ambition level must be commensurate to the historical challenge that we face. In my view, this is an existential question for the EU. Either the EU successfully transforms into a geopolitical actor, or we will lose this period of history, come out as losers, and that will have long-term consequences for this continent. Of course, you have to say, well, we have a lot of member state money. Okay, so let's add the member state money, which, the member states, their size of GDP is very high. internationally speaking. It's about 50% of GDP. EU is dramatically small, but the member states are dramatically high. So let's do that. It does change the equation, as you can see, but in percentage point, it's not that impressive. So make no mistake that we all have to go up, and therefore the argument from Kubilius to say the best way, the most efficient way, the most effective way by far is to coordinate. There's no-brainers. There's no-brainers. Really kind of pains me to see that we're not aligned on this. So yeah, that's where we are. Now, so far so old in terms of discussion on budget. So I wanted to zoom out, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit and try to use budget in a different way. One way to look at budget discussions is to say, how can we improve the result, the impact, the outcome of what we spent? Let's do that. If you have to symbolize pooling money at EU level, it's obviously the post-COVID recovery fund, the NextGenEU. When that was invented in 2021, I don't think people took the next generation thing literally, in the sense it's going to take that long before it's being spent. Yeah? But we are 6 years down the track almost. Yeah? So if we ask for more money, we have to be able to spend the money, and we have to be able to spend the money very quickly in a very targeted way. That's also the challenge for the EU. One is tied to the other. I agree with those who say if you can't do that, then why should we give you more money? Competitiveness with these two other players. Mr. Trump signs executive decrees, and the money is allocated. And in China, it's a one-party state. They have a nice commission on top from a certain threshold of investment. That commission decides. And the chairman is Mr. Xi. You know him. He's the president of China. Yeah? So that's what we have to be competitive against. That's the standard we face. So we have to become more creative and more daring in the kind of top-down centralization in terms of decision in certain priority areas, or we will not become competitive. And if you can't spend it competitively, then why spend it? Now, you might say Trump is not exactly an example to follow for Europe, and I would agree with you. But this kind of executive decision-making comes already from Obama, when we did post-financial crisis Keynesianism. That was the same thing. And Biden, when he invented industrial policy or brought it back to the United States, which Europe is bringing back into Europe, industrial policy, he had a very clear kind of way to look at it. First of all, focus. Science, chips. Science was kind of, well, a lot of things, but bottom line, it was essentially energy transition and the chips stack technology. Now, the energy transition, now we have Trump and he's derailing it somehow, but at least those two sectors generated 2,000 billion of top-down federal commitments, all types of commitments, not just straight-up money, all types of commitments. Subsidies, co-investment, reduction in certain rates, and so on, creative. Yeah? We come up with 2,000, and then the multiplier. That's the thing we have to become better at. Multiply public money, multiply it. Then you have more bang for the buck. 10,000, that's middle-of-the-road estimate by Goldman Sachs for two sectors of industry. Top-down with a one-stop for the investment projects in Washington, D.C. under the administration. That's something to take into consideration, I think. You can look around. There's a lot of new vehicles, funding initiatives and funds and schemes that are going to be developed in the near future in Europe, I think. Well, take a page out of that book. This is what we need to do. Focus, speed, centralization. I was using InvestEU as a benchmark. InvestEU, EIB, you know, they do great stuff, but small stuff, 25 billion, multiplied gives you then, their multiplier 40 is 400 billion for 7 years. That gives them the possibility to look at different sectors, social, infrastructure, digitization, SMEs, you spread it, you spread it, you spread it. Yeah? Not so good. DARPA. DARPA is famous for having breakthrough innovations that create entire sectors of industry. You look at the annual budget of DARPA, we can do that in Europe. Easily, fingers in the nose. Yeah? Current VC investment, private sector VC investment around current DARPA projects in the United States is the 400 billion on top of the 4 billion. That's 100 multiplier. Yeah? Let's learn from that. Opportunity. War is terrible, but it's an opportunity for Europe. For the life of me, and I've been one advocating publicly for that, since the invasion of Ukraine, I can't understand why we haven't taken advantage of this attack on Europe to cultivate a narrative and get the population behind, we are going to win this, and we are going to make our country and our continent secure and safe, and do that by giving them the opportunity to invest in it. This we have been doing since the medieval times. In the Italian city-states, and the United States made it democratic and retail with their civil war. And in the First World War, the United States, with loans, bonds, where citizens could give money to, lend money to, piled together 25% of the GDP. No discussions about budget lines needed for funding the war effort. Out of the room. The citizens pay for it, and we pay back over time. Yeah? 25% of US GDP today, that would be $8 trillion mobilized. The Marshall Plan, we're going to have to do a recovery and reconstruction effort in Ukraine, I hope very soon. Yeah? I hear 100 billion being mentioned in the MFF. Yeah? The Marshall Fund was a one-off effort, 5% of US GDP at the time, that translates to 1,600 billion. And it was leveraged, of course. If you want to reconstruct and you have a lot of money, you can reconstruct also institutionally, politically, etc., and that's going to have to happen. Otherwise, we are not sure we're going to have a very easy integration of such a significant country in the EU. So the ambition level has to go higher. And the money is there. It was mentioned here. The money is there. Yeah. This is the slide of economic dependency created by globalization. And you can put figures on it, and these figures are dynamic. In the top left corner, you have the Draghi figure about the drain of investment capital away from Europe to the US every year. In the bottom left, you have the spend on the big tech, the US big techs from Europe. Obviously, there the way is up with AI. In the bottom right corner, you have the spend on procurement for defense weaponry, defense from the US. I've read this week in the Financial Times from Mr. Rutte that he is going to convince Mr. Trump that we are now en route from Europe to buy 300 billion of US defense procurement. I don't think that's such tremendous progress, if you ask me, with all that taxpayer money. And you can do that for Chinese clean tech and so on, and the hydrocarbons. That is, if you replace it, and that people argue for that. The top of the EU argues for that. If you replace that with a homegrown industry and technology, you win 2 times. Huh? So there's an opportunity. If you're looking for a way to have budget space that can create growth and that can attract private investment, if you focus enough with public money, you create more space. You avoid the discussions about resources and how much percentage and so on. You avoid it. For those of you who don't know French or can't read in French, The American Challenge was one of the world's best-selling non-fiction books in the 1960s. What was the observation that the writer made? The legacy of the Marshall Plan was a lot of American industry in Europe. Yeah? A lot of American industry in Europe. If you add it all up, it was the second biggest industrial power in the world after the US. The American industry in Europe in the 60s. That created a shock, a political shock. That book created a political shock. Out of that came Airbus. That was the trigger for the most important European countries at the time, UK first in, then out, and then in. Yeah? And France and Germany, and eventually in consortium, and eventually Airbus became a node for the EU. It was not an EU project, but or an EEC project, it was a node for the EU. Critical, strategic, technological, industrial, and we're going to leverage it in the near future. How much taxpayer money did that cost in 2026 figures? I've done it. I've looked at the complaints with the World Trade Organization about state aid. That's the figure. I think it's peanuts. When you know that we are spending 600 billion and more soon every single year on defense industrial technology. What's stopping us from multiplying this model? We have opportunity enough. If you do that, the multiplication of that, I think, is very significant. Instead, what do I see? I see the return of industrial policy as a return of nationalism in Europe. I'm sorry. Yeah? So that's a political leadership question that we talked about in the last panel here. That's why you don't get your new, next generation fighter jet or air system, combat air system between France and Germany. That's the bottom line of it. Yeah? You can come up with all kinds of good arguments why that's not the case, but that's the bottom line. And so for me, the real issue about the budget, I bring back from the dead two European founders who meet themselves in a bar, talk about the future of the EU. Who is right? Is it Monnet, who said, just wait for crisis to happen, and out of their national interests, they all pool and become European? That's the way it works, very pragmatic. And then you have the other Belgian, Paul-Henri Spaak, who's a bit more cynical, right? You can read it. Of course, I personally hope that Paul-Henri Spaak is wrong and the other one is right. But I think that is still the issue today. Yeah? Still the issue today, in 2026. After so much that has happened in Europe, and after the wholesale return of history. And actually, this is what we have to recognize. What we are facing is the moment that we faced in the beginning of the 1950s, when the world was dark, and there was a lot of threat. And we tried to come together with a political community and a defense community. And it failed. And then the US said, I'm going to give you Marshall aid, but if you don't get your act together and come together, you're not going to get any. And that's how we got the economic part that led eventually to the European Union. Are we still that Europe? And that was only the core at the time. Are we still that Europe? I have difficulty accepting that as a European citizen. And again, nobody says we can do this better without the EU. Nobody. So, okay, live up to it, I would say. My message would be, competitiveness is the word. Use budget competitiveness as a yardstick in the whole political debate around budget. What is competitiveness for budget? It is about more money and resources, yes, but it's also about spending that much wiser and having the ambition level that is according to the historical necessity by having the ability to become fast and competitive in spending it, by having more return and more leverage and more multiplier effect, and doing that somehow we are creative enough politically, somehow in the and. Europe, states, private, yeah, together in that single direction. If we do that, I think we're there. And I'm a believer. So I leave you with that. Wish you a good lunch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marc De Vos, there for that very inspiring, engaging talk. I have that metaphor of the worm. I think that will stick with me for the rest of the week as I do my job. Marc De Vos there, professor from Ghent and also the co-CEO of Itinera Institute. Thank you so much for bringing our conference so visually to life for us today. And indeed, you said enjoy lunch. It is indeed time for us to stretch our legs, mingle, and of course, enjoy lunch. Lunch will be served just on the left as you go out of the room. And you can join us back here again at 1:45. I'll be sitting down with the president of the EIB group, Nadia Calvino. So see you then. And in the meantime, enjoy your lunch.